One year, I guess I was about 16, I decided, okay, this year on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, I'm going to do everything you're supposed to do on Yom Kippur. But as I'm walking home at the end of the holiday, I'm thinking it didn't work. I don't know. God just seems as distant and alien as he did 24 hours ago.
Hey friends, Jeff Morgan here. As more Jewish people all over the world are realizing that Jesus, Yeshua, is indeed Messiah and Savior of the world, our guest today has played a very influential and significant role in helping us understand how that can be. I'm here with Randy Newman, a Jewish follower of Jesus and author of Engaging with Jewish People, Questioning Evangelism, Corner Conversations, Mere Evangelism, and more. He is Senior Fellow for Apologetics and Evangelism with the C.S. Lewis Institute, and I am so excited to have Randy Newman here today. Randy, we met a few months back at a conference in Washington, D.C., and I told myself that I must have you on the channel and share you with our viewers. You have a wonderful way of sharing your faith that not only helps Jewish people understand that Jesus truly is who he claimed to be, but you show people how to have insightful and enriching conversations about faith in Jesus, which we are going to talk about today. So thank you for being with us today, Randy.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. I'm delighted to be with you.
Great. So first things first, I love your Yom Kippur story, which I'd like you to share with the viewers, and what you called your theological trump card whenever someone presented Jesus to you before you were a believer. So my first question to you, as a Jewish boy raised in a Jewish home, how did you become a follower of Jesus?
Well, yeah, I'm originally from suburbs of New York City. Grew up out on Long Island, if people are familiar with that. And I grew up in a time when Jewish parents really wanted to make sure that their children knew what it meant to be Jewish. So I went to synagogue and I went to Hebrew school, that's what we called it, 3 afternoons a week, in addition to public school, to learn about how to participate in Jewish worship and all of that. And so I took it really seriously. In fact, I think I took my Jewishness more seriously than my parents did. And I really think I was trying to connect with God in some kind of meaningful way beyond just ritual. But everything I learned in Hebrew school and in preparation for my bar mitzvah just felt like ritual. It didn't seem like to connect in any kind of meaningful way. And then one year, I guess I was about 16, I decided, okay, this year on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, I'm going to do everything you're supposed to do on Yom Kippur. And I'm not going to do everything you're not supposed to do on Yom Kippur. So no eating, no driving in the car, go to synagogue all evening the night before and all day, say all the prayers, confess all the sins, do everything. Because I thought, finally, for once, I'll get right with God, because I've been leaving parts out up till now. And this particular year, I did everything you could possibly do. But as I'm walking home at the end of the holiday, I'm thinking it didn't work. I don't know. God just seems as distant and alien as he did 24 hours ago. And I was really discouraged. And I looked down at my shoes. I was dressed up in a nice suit. I was wearing dress shoes. And at that point, I remembered that in Hebrew school, we learned that on Yom Kippur, you're not supposed to wear dress shoes. This is not in the scriptures, by the way. This is in rabbinic tradition. And there's a million different explanations about why, none of which seem all that compelling. But you're not supposed to wear dress shoes. And I thought, oh, that's why it didn't work. I wore the wrong shoes. I guess I'll just have to wait till next year. And then I thought, well, that's got to be the stupidest thing in the world. You got to be kidding me. This is how you connect with God, by remembering this rule, wear the right shoes, say the right words. It's got to be something more meaningful and real. And so that was a very discouraging experience. I think I don't know, I didn't quite pray, but it had the effect of a prayer of, God, if you're out there, show me who you are. And I now look back at that experience, and I think God began answering that prayer, however much I may have meant it, by leading me to a group of believers who really did know God in a real and personal way. And they were all Gentiles, and they were at this church youth group. And a friend of mine from high school invited me to the church youth group. He said, you should come because the girls are cute. So I went. That's why I went. He was right. But I met this group of believers who they talked about God like they really knew him, like he was right there with them. They prayed about everything. They prayed in English, which I thought that was like an unfair advantage. I mean, it didn't seem right. I thought God only knew Hebrew. I didn't really think, but I mean, so I was really attracted to how they knew God so personally. And then I think what you're referring to, my trump card, was whenever they would say anything about Jesus. I mean, well, I started asking them, how is it that you know God so well that you could talk about anything and you could pray in English? And they would say, well, it was because of Jesus. And I think what you're referring to, that trump card, I always said, oh, well, I'm Jewish. We don't believe in Jesus. There.
Right.
And up until that point, that always ended the conversation. People, oh, you're Jewish. Yeah, okay, never mind. But this group of believers said, well, so what? I mean, Jesus was Jewish. His followers were Jewish. The book about him, the New Testament, was written by Jewish people. For the first 300 years of the belief in Jesus as the Messiah, the vast majority of believers were Jewish, and I didn't know any of that. And so that really was like a shakeup for me and forced me to start really thinking. It started me reading the Gospel according to Matthew, started me reading other people who had been skeptics who then became believers. So it all, that took a long time, and it wasn't until my sophomore year in university when all of the pieces kind of came together. So maybe I should stop there and see if you have some, I don't know, a follow-up question.
Yeah, well, it's one of the reasons why most people never shared with me either. Right after I came to faith, through an amazing series of events, I called my Christian friends and said, "Hey, why didn't you ever share with me the gospel? Why didn't you ever share with me who Jesus was?" And they said, "Because you're Jewish." And I didn't think it just didn't come to my mind, that you don't need to hear about Jesus because you're Jewish. And I thought, everybody needs to hear about Jesus. And so that kind of started me on my journey towards sharing the gospel as much as I possibly can, or the good news about the Messiah, with as many Jewish people as I possibly can. Also being raised in a Jewish home and coming to faith in Jesus, having not even looked for him. I wasn't even looking for him. I just knew that I wanted to die. And so when I had my moment, when I was at a church service I was invited to, and this is before I came to faith. And when I had this moment where they were reading about the transfiguration of Jesus, and when I saw that Jesus was talking with Moses and Elijah, I thought, okay, these are names I recognize. What are they doing in this book? And it really sparked my interest. And it just, since that time, I just haven't stopped reading the actually, to be fair, the Old Testament as well, I wasn't really familiar with, but the New Testament, just diving in and realizing the Jewishness of this book. So thank you for your story. So most people would consider Judaism and Christianity two mutually exclusive theologies or religions. And when I was growing up, this is exactly what I thought as well. Jesus is for them, Moses is for us. But an open and unbiased study of the Hebrew scriptures showed me otherwise. How do Judaism and Christianity actually fit together?
Well, yeah, I think my experience is rather similar to yours. I do think it's important for us to note that while you and I and many others have come to see, no, they're not mutually exclusive, and no, they're not opposites. In fact, they fit really well together. In fact, I'll even say it more strongly. We do have to acknowledge there has been a terribly painful history between these two groups of people. And there has been a horrible amount of anti-Semitism brought against Jewish people by people who claim to be Christians. So there's good reason why we would think these are antagonistic towards each other. They shouldn't be, but history gives us evidence as to why people are predisposed to believe that. So I don't think that those are legitimate reasons to say that they're separate, but we don't just come to this topic in a sterile environment.
Right.
It's a pretty messy environment. What I have found, I mean, similar to you, I grew up, in a Jewish home, but I really didn't know the Hebrew scriptures all that well. It was after I came to be a believer in Jesus, and I saw enough of the prophecies in the Tanakh that were fulfilled in the person of Yeshua that I just started exploring both testaments and found these are not two separate books. They really fit together very, very well. And there's this theme of partial fulfillment and greater fulfillment that just builds all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have found, and this is really disturbing to me, but I think there's just a whole lot of Christians who don't know of the Jewish roots of their Christian faith. And so they think of it as a very non-Jewish belief. And they don't know the Old Testament, the Tanakh.
Right.
And then, of course, there Jewish people know very little, if anything, about the New Testament, about Jesus. And so they think of it as these two completely different things. But when you start reading them, I mean, the echoes flowing back and forth are just amazing. When I first read the Gospel of Matthew, someone had given me a paperback version of the New Testament, and on the cover it said "The Great News." And I thought, well, that's a slick piece of marketing. I like that. So I started reading. And after a little while, I thought, this is great. And it is new. For me, it's new. I thought Jesus was a Gentile who said very, very non-Jewish things. Well, no, he was fitting right in with all of the prophets. The book of Matthew, the very first book in the New Testament, begins with a genealogy of names, all of which are Jewish, all of which are Hebrew names. They're ones that I knew from my scripture. I was like, wait a minute, this is just like picking up where the Tanakh left off. In fact, the version of the Tanakh that I was given for my bar mitzvah, the order, the sequence of the books is a little bit different than what is typically in a Christian Bible. So the Tanakh ends with a whole bunch of names in Chronicles. And so Matthew just kind of picked up, oh, well, we got a list of names here. I'll begin my book with a list of names. So the books fit together,
right?
But they fit together in a sense of like anticipation and fulfillment. And when you read the anticipation, but you don't read the fulfillment, it feels like, wait a minute, this is like an unfinished story. This is like, you've left me hanging. You're like, there's too many predictions here that haven't come true yet. And that's why when you read Matthew's gospel in particular, for me, but all of the scripture, the New Testament, there's sort of this sense of like, oh, that's what that was pointing to. Right. Oh, that story was incomplete until now. And I still, 40 plus years later, I still keep seeing those connections. And it's like, oh, that story now makes so much more sense.
Yes, the flow from the Old Testament or the Tanakh into the New Testament is pretty seamless, because the first book of, I think, isn't it Mark, in terms of chronological order, begins with the coming of the one that is of the spirit of Elijah.
Yeah.
And the Old Testament closes before Chronicles, which is basically the chronology of everything that happened. Ends with the coming of Elijah the prophet. And so it's a wonderful seamless continuation of the cyclical story that continues throughout the Old Testament. And I remember reading the first sentence of the New Testament, and I was blown away as a Jewish kid, having no experience in either the Old Testament or the New Testament, reading the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, son of David, son of Abraham. And I said, this is no less Jewish than everything I've ever read from the Old Testament. Amazing. So they fit together seamlessly. It's the we have a problem, and this is how it's fulfilled.
Yeah. And by the way, there's two things that did stand out to me as when I said it was news. Okay, the first thing was the rabbi at my synagogue and all of my Jewish culture and very secular open-mindedness. I had been indoctrinated really that all religions are basically the same, and Jesus wasn't really saying anything different than anybody else had said. And he was just a good teacher who said some really nice things about how we should love one another. All right. Mm-hmm. Well, then I started reading, and yeah, he did say some nice things about how we should love one another. But he made these outlandish, amazing statements about himself, claiming to be the Messiah, claiming to have always existed from all eternity, claiming to be God himself, accepting worship. I mean, either this guy is the craziest megalomaniac who's ever lived, or he really was who he said he was.
Right, right.
That was the first thing that really grabbed me. The other thing was that whole theme about fulfillment. It's not as simplistic as a lot of people think. Fulfillment in the scriptures or prophecy, it's not always, I mean, sometimes it is, but it's not always as precise as on Tuesday at 2 p.m, this guy is going to show up. And then on Tuesday at 2 p.m, he showed up. Well, there are some of those kinds of predictions, but they're much more, it's like a bigger category about fulfillment. And it's this kind of picture, like the picture of God parting the water and delivering people through the Red Sea, is a picture of God's salvation and then punishing God's enemies. That's a picture that then gets filled out in much, much bigger ways of God providing something even far bigger than just temporary salvation. And so it's that kind of, there are all these fulfillment images that get a fuller expression. And so the whole theme of prophecy and fulfillment, at first it was kind of like a stumbling block for me. I was like, wait a minute, I don't think this is quite as simple as some of those charts that people have shown me.
Right.
But when I studied it and dug in, this is so much better, so much bigger, and very consistent with the way the prophets talked about the past and the future. The prophets saw that things in the past were foreshadowing things that were still yet to come in the future.
Yes. I agree. It's important to take a deeper dive, and that's what a lot of the passages, the prophetic passages, force you to do if you're actually really curious to look. And I would encourage anyone, just as well as you would, to open up the New Testament and take a look. So, Randy, I read your book, Questioning Evangelism, twice, and engaging with Jewish. I'm engaging with Jewish people, I think twice as well. I love them.
Did you not understand them the first time? Did you? It's kind of a dense book. I'm sorry.
I'm a slow reader.
Oh, okay.
I'm a slow reader, and information doesn't stay in my mind very long unless I'm a repetitive. I need repetition. So I read them twice, and I'd read them again, and I would recommend anybody reading them. What was life-changing for me regarding my approach to those that wish to challenge my Jewish faith in Jesus was how to answer questions. And as soon as I started doing that, using the methods in your book, I soon realized how those that challenged me hardly had any answers for their own beliefs. I mean, I was really surprised. I'd heard answers like, well, go ask the rabbis, or I don't have enough knowledge to answer your questions. I heard that one a lot, but I know for sure that you're wrong about Jesus. I heard that one. I think that's the most commonly used one. I don't have enough information to answer your question, but I know for sure you're wrong. How are you inspired to write Questioning Evangelism and develop this style of conversation when sharing your faith about Jesus?
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's very encouraging to me. By the way, Questioning Evangelism is coming out in a few months, maybe in October, in a third edition. We kind of updated it a little bit. We kind of updated some illustrations. So I'm very excited that the publisher wanted to do that.
I'll have to read that twice.
Well, the way the book came about was out of frustration. I had been trained a lot in since becoming a believer and now being involved in ministry, I was in campus ministry. What I had been trained in is, all right, and figure out what are the common questions that people are going to ask, and then what are the answers. And it was kind of like a matching test. If they asked question number 3, well, then you gave them answer number 3. And I was really good at memorizing and coming up with the answers. And so people would ask questions like, aha, I know that question. I've thought about that. Here's the answer. Boom. And it didn't work. I didn't see people go, oh, thank you. You've changed my life. I'm going to be a believer. And I would come away frustrated with, okay, no, I know that was the right answer. It was a philosophically solid, biblically supported answer, but it didn't move people from unbelief to belief. In fact, sometimes it backfired. It only hardened them in their unbelief. And it would like leave some people who are like, well, yeah, maybe that's a good answer, but I still think you're an idiot. So I needed, I don't know, a different approach. And so 2 things. I studied about how Jesus interacted with people. And it was so much more of a back and forth dialogue rather than just a, here's the answer. And I was also struck with how very often he didn't answer people's questions, at least not right away. He answered a question with a question. Right. And at first that didn't strike me as all that odd, because that's very Jewish. That's how we Jews talk to each other, you know. So how's the weather? How could the weather be today? It's July. You know, how's your family? Why do you ask? I mean, you know, like we just so. But I started looking about how Jesus responded to people's questions. They would say things like, is it okay for us to heal on the Sabbath? Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And Jesus didn't just deliver the answer. He asked the question, well, if you had an animal that fell into the ditch, wouldn't you pull it out? Or is it okay for us to get a divorce? He said, well, what did Moses write? And so much of the time he answered a question with a question. And I started experimenting with that with students. They would ask questions and I would answer with a question answered with a question. And it just became a much better, more productive conversation. Instead of it, see, when you, well, here, let me, like, what happens when I ask a question? Don't you start, you start trying to answer it. You start trying to mull over ideas, or it engages you in the answering process. What happened before is people would ask a question and they would kind of stand, you know, at an arm's length. Let me watch you kind of come up with that.
Let me watch you fumble.
Yeah. Let's see how well you do at this one. But if you answer a question with a question, they start wrestling with, well, now, wait a minute, what is that? And I also had to try to mix it with asking God to work in me so that I really cared about people and that I really respected them. I wasn't just trying to come up with the right answer, which is how I think I had done it for a very long time. And it was almost like a gotcha. See, I got the right answer. Aha, you can't refute me, can you? Well, that's not treating a person as a person. That's just treating them as a, I don't know, a means to an end, asking machine to be responded to. Sure. So it was better to, Lord, would you help me engage with this person, love them, respect them? And so, you know, if they would ask a question of, you know, like, why do you believe the Bible? Well, how much of it have you already read? And what have you found? And are there some things in there that seem to point in the direction that, gee, this really has some authority to it? So again, you're engaging them in the answering process, not because you're trying to win, but because you're trying to lead them out of darkness into light. Yeah. And you also discover whether or not the question that they're asking is actually the real question. Because sometimes people will ask questions and that's not really their question. Yes. They're trying to get you, they're trying to trap you, they're trying to get you to sound ignorant or foolish or something. And so by asking and engaging with questions, you discover what their real question is. Yes. And boy, did Yeshua ever do that, master. Right. I mean, there were times when he knew, okay, this isn't a real question. They're just trying to trap me. And
Yeah.
so he would answer a question with a question of, well, let me ask you a question.
Yes.
And it would reveal that, oh, they're just trying to trap me. And so sometimes we need that kind of wisdom. Again, we need to do it gently, but if someone's being a fool, we need to answer a fool as their folly deserves, lest they be wise in their own eyes. That's what Proverbs 26:4 and 5 says. So we need wisdom, again, not to win, but to help them get out of the imprisonment, really, of their unbelief or their insincerity.
Right. Good point. I just want to restate that anybody that hasn't read Randy's books, Questioning Evangelism and Engaging with Jewish People, look, we're all Jewish here. This is a Jewish YouTube channel. Randy's Jewish, I'm Jewish, we're all Jewish here. This is within the family. So it's not like we're Christians, trying to trap Jews and steal them from Judaism. We are Jewish people that have found the Jewish Messiah. And so I just want to recommend Randy's books, Questioning Evangelism, Engaging with Jewish People, and all his other books as well. They're fascinating to anybody that's watching. So thank you for that, Randy. So Randy, what advice would you give to a Jewish person that is curious about Jesus and his claims about himself, but hesitant to investigate the New Testament because of their upbringing, things that they've heard, and their influence from others?
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity. Well, I would say to such a person several things. First is, well, don't be surprised if this feels like a big deal, because it is. And don't be surprised if it feels, ooh, this is like dangerous territory, because we have been told that this is dangerous territory. So there's good reason to feel trepidation, but that's not good enough to stay away. So I just want to sort of acknowledge the difficulty of this. And if you feel uncomfortable, well, yeah, probably. There's a whole lot of things in life we need to do, even if they're uncomfortable.
Good point.
We can't make our comfort and ease our highest priority. Some of the most important things in life, like good, close friendships, marriage, raising children. There's a whole lot of that stuff that's not comfortable at all.
Absolutely.
But there's a greater value and good of truth and goodness and beauty, even if it's uncomfortable. So that's the first thing I would say. The second is I really would encourage people, read the scriptures for yourself, especially one of the first books of the New Testament, the Gospel according to Matthew or Mark or Luke or John. I think the very first one, Matthew, was written specifically for a Jewish audience. So that's the one I recommend. And read it and allow it to try to, speak to you for what it is, rather than any preconceived ideas you have. And if it's very different than what you expected, well, kind of allow that. And then one last thing I would suggest is try to see if you can interact with a friend who is a believer, and to talk out loud about what you're reading, maybe read stuff together, ask questions. You need to find someone who you trust and you feel like they'll allow you to move at the pace that God is revealing things to you. So, you want to avoid a friend who's overly pushy, but not someone who's just going to, well, hey, whatever you want. No, I'm none of that. So I think having a friend who already is a believer, who can answer some questions or do some research to try to find out where there are good answers. Those would be the kind of things I'd encourage.
Yes. What a lot of Christians, Gentile Christians, they are afraid to speak with Jewish people because of the past, because of the horrible anti-Semitism that has sprung out of the church through so-called Christians. What advice would you give to if a Gentile Christian that's watching this, they want to speak to a Jewish person about Jesus? What advice would you give to them?
Well, in some ways, it parallels some of the things I just said to a Jewish person who's investigating.
Hmm.
Don't expect this to be comfortable or easy,
Right.
but make sure you have a value that's more important than comfort and ease. So God's glory and people's salvation
Right.
and the proclaiming of the truth. So that's the first thing is don't expect it to be easy. But then push past the barriers. Ask God to give you the strength to push past those barriers, and even to think through. Well, what if they get really mad at me? Well, they might. Yeah. So is there a sense of identity that you have in Yeshua that's so strong that if people reject you, well, it hurts, but it's not devastating. So that's
Yeah.
we need to dig into think about how strongly God loves and accepts you because of the finished work of the Messiah. Think of his infinite love and that the fact that you could never lose it.
Hmm.
Well, then okay, then step into this, and all right, this person might reject me, maybe, but maybe not. I would even think probably not. They'll listen to you,
Yeah.
and I think step into the whole process, remembering this is so crucial. It's not just two people who are involved in this conversation. I mean, there's them, the non-believing person, and there's me, the believer, but there's God
Yes.
superintending this whole conversation, and he's
Right.
going to give you wisdom about what to say, and he's going to work in that person's heart in a way that only he can work.
Right.
It's an absolutely supernatural event that's happening there, and
Right.
well, it's at least two supernatural events. There's the supernatural event in their heart, because scriptures tell us that all of us, we were dead in our unbelief, and God made us alive. That's an absolute
Hmm.
miracle. And
Right.
Yeshua told us, apart from me, you can do nothing. How's that for Jewish bluntness? Apart from me, nothing. Upkiss, you can't do anything. So it's like, okay, so God, when you work in me and when you work in them and do something absolutely supernatural, and I'm gonna do the best I can to answer questions and to
Sure.
think and to point people. But overall, this is a supernatural event, and I'm asking a supernatural God to work in both of us and in this process.
Right. And I love that point because a lot of Jewish people, I myself, when I was younger, think of Jewish believers or Christians trying to convert me and pull me out of my Jewishness, pull me out of being a Jew, and convert me out of my Jewishness into another religion, which is not the case. Um, and it's also a work that we can't do. I remember talking to someone once, and she said to me, "You can't convince me that Jesus is who he said he was and is the Messiah." And I said, "You're right. It's not my job to. That's the Spirit of God. Only the Spirit of God can do that. I can't." And what it does though is it removed the pressure
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
between the two people that were having the conversation, me and this woman. And so she felt, oh, he's not trying to make me into something that I don't want to be by the end of this conversation. He's sharing something with me, and he realizes that, or I realize that I don't have the power to change her
Yeah.
into a believer. And so when I work out a lot, and I was at the gym one day before I became a believer, and there was a man that I wanted to go meet, and I went and met him, and he was just a light. He was just shining. And I said, I have to meet this guy. He has something that I don't. I want to die. And this guy looks like he's alive. So I went to meet him, and he ended up praying for me. And he was part of me coming to faith. He was part of that process. But he said, Jeff, it's not like I'm trying to bring you into my fold here. I've been adopted into your fold and believe in your God. And what that also did was that it also removed the pressure of the conversation as well, because it removed the idea that here's someone trying to steal me out of what I grew up knowing and being.
Yeah. Good. That's good.
Yeah. Well,
Yes, all of that. I'd say amen.
Yeah, well, this has been a joy, Randy, and thank you for sharing your stories and your wisdom with our viewers.
Well, thanks for the time. I'm grateful for it.
Yes, and go get Randy's books if you haven't seen them yet. All the information about Randy and his books can be found in the description below. If you'd like more of this kind of content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the Jews for Jesus YouTube channel. And feel free to visit our website at jewsforjesus.org and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And like I said before, information regarding Randy Newman and his books can be found in the description below. Thank you for watching. Take care and stay tuned for the next video.